To be sure, the Bush record, like all records, will be mixed, but the portrait that will eventually emerge will be comprised of many, many colors, not just the varying shades of black that often fill the canvas today. And so, as I said, the revision process has already begun. Not long ago, there was a History News Network poll that found 61% of historians ranked Bush as the worst president in history. Apparently, they have not studied James Buchanan. But here's what's interesting. Even since then, and that was about a year ago, there have been a couple of important pieces written in very important journals. One came in National Journal. It was written by Jonathan Rauch. He argued that Bush, in fact, is going to end up doing much better than this and will probably belong in the middling ranks of presidents. And then more recently, Fareed Zakaria of Newsweek magazine and also CNN argued in a Newsweek piece entitled "What Bush Got Right" that much of the criticism leveled at the president's policy is directed at his earlier policies. And these are his words, quote, "The policy the administration is currently pursuing is less vulnerable to easy attacks." So thus, in basically a one-year span, you see Bush already beginning to encourage some discussion, to encourage some debate, and frankly to receive a little bit of credit from people who are not inclined to support him. Fareed Zakaria was an open opponent of the president and endorsed Senator Obama. So there is a little bit of a shift that you're already beginning to see. I think the key to this, and I think you're going to continue to see kind of a reevaluation, and the key is that so much of the focus now is on the content of Bush's decisions, and I think probably too little has been on the context of his decisions. And again, to go back to Churchill, he famously joked democracy was the worst form of government except for every other one tried in the world. There's something of a similar dynamic at work here in the sense that George W. Bush, after 9/11, found himself facing unparalleled challenges in a whole new world that no one had ever imagined before. And because of that, there were simply no easy choices. There were no obvious solutions. There were no clear-cut paths. He had to make his own way. And that's essentially what he tried to do. Obviously, there were setbacks along the way. Obviously, there were some successes. Historians will debate that. But as they do debate that in the future, they will take into account the fact that these were extraordinary times and extraordinary challenges that he faced. None of this happened in a vacuum. This was not the 1990s where you had a relatively peaceful world and a roaring economy, and we could consume ourselves with things like impeachment. These were very serious challenges that confronted us in a way that no challenge really had before. So that leads to our second topic. Not only what was Bush doing, but why was he doing it, and what was he trying to do? I think it's important to mention, and this was discussed earlier, sort of the backdrop of Bush coming into office after the Florida recount, after the Clinton years, after a very close election. He had some real challenges even before 9/11, and I'd like to refer to the work of Forrest McDonald, who argues that the Founding Fathers, drawing on the British example, essentially created two descriptions for the president, two job descriptions for the president, a head of state and a chief political leader. Now in England, these jobs are done by different people. The prime minister does the politics, and the queen does the head of state. But here in America, you do both, which is a very tough job description under any circumstance. And it was particularly difficult for Bush coming in after Florida and after a close election. And so I think it's important to kind of look back and remember some of those early days, because they've been largely forgotten in our discussion of the Bush presidency. This is a man who came in really working hard at the head of state role, really trying to bind the country together, trying to heal some wounds. I went back and pulled up some media coverage from those early days. This is what Richard Cohen wrote in the Washington Post in the spring of 2001, describing how Bush was meeting with Democrats at the White House and how he was operating in the early days. Quote, "He wades into groups of Democrats, patting them on the back, bestowing nicknames on them, and proving, as I'd always feared, that he is impossible to dislike. I hate people I can't hate." Now, I should add, a more recent glance at a more recent Cohen column shows that he no longer has that problem. But this was Bush of the early days. This was Bush meeting with Ted Kennedy in the Oval Office about education and working on No Child Left Behind, and a lot of that has been forgotten. What happened? Well, obviously 9/11 happened. And 9/11 changed everything again, as was discussed this morning, the domestic policy, where I think Bush really wanted to lead and had really campaigned on in 2000. took a back seat, and he essentially becomes a wartime president. And really, almost from the beginning, you see the seeds of the discontent from the very beginning. I mean, war is a very difficult thing, and you could see almost from the beginning that he is headed towards some very difficult times, not only politically but with the country as a whole. I mean, remember in those early days some of the criticisms that were leveled at him. You know, he read a book to school children. He didn't rush back to the White House, and you know, he wasn't brave like Rudy. He wasn't on the site. I mean, there was a lot of real nitpicking of him right from the very start. And so I think it's important to remember that from the very beginning, I think he knew that this was not going to be easy. There were going to be opponents. War is an inherently divisive process, and he would have to fight very difficult, very important battles. And so you see, after 9/11, sort of the soft tone of the first 8 or 9 months giving way to hard choices and tough realities. So what was the president trying to do? Again, to go back to history and the legacy. Well, he would tell you that he busied himself fighting important legislative battles, getting insurance for the airline industry, and creating a new counterterrorism infrastructure, as Brian discussed. And even while he was fighting the war, trying to create something of a tone of tolerance. Remember, during the Afghan campaign, he took time to visit a mosque, and in addition to that, created Freedom Corps explicitly for the purpose of enlisting people in volunteerism and in community service. It's interesting also, fast forward about a year later, you recall he fought Congress over having a cabinet-level Department for Homeland Security. He wanted it based in the White House. And it's interesting that, for the most part, I mean, he basically ceded on that issue, and a cabinet-level agency was created. So it's hard to look back at that and see this partisan caricature that has been created in later years, when in fact he was, sort of taking the other guy's ideas on many occasions. But nevertheless, he still is in very uncharted waters, very difficult times, very new challenges, and appear to be doing pretty well with the American people. And we've talked about this before at this conference. In 2002, Republicans, for the first time since 1934, win seats in Congress. They take back the Senate. They increase their margin in the House. And I think it's safe to say if the war on terror had ended sometime in 2003, when his numbers were very, very high and had been for a while, he likely would have remained a very popular president. But the president believed in times of crisis, like Lincoln and like Roosevelt, that he had the prerogative to lead boldly, that he needed to lead boldly, and frankly that he was now living in a very different world. This is his quote to CBS News a couple of years ago. He said, quote, "September 11th affected my thinking. It basically changed my attitude about the world, and I resolved around that time that I would do everything to protect the American people." So here is the paradigm shift that happens, at least in the president's mind. He decided, as he said often, that he could no longer be on defense, that he could no longer wait for another attack. That essentially we've seen what crazy people can do with planes. Imagine what crazy people could do with something much more deadly. And so he decides that Iraq is an issue that has to be confronted. And you'll recall in the 1990s, Congress passed legislation calling for regime change in Iraq. Bill Clinton signed it into law. And so this was not necessarily a new policy in the sense that there was a bipartisan support that this guy needed to go. But it was new in the sense that the president wanted to do something about it, and was willing to go to the country and try to make the case to do it. Now, it's also worth remembering that he was widely supported at the time, in terms of the intelligence reports that he was reading concerning weapons of mass destruction. He decided that Saddam certainly was trying to get these weapons and may well have them. Most members of Congress voted the same way. Most Americans in a Pew poll that came out agreed. Even the UN said that Saddam had these weapons. So it's again, some of this is sort of lost in history. That there were a lot of people who were very comfortable, perhaps maybe not with the details of the plan, but with the direction that the conversation on Iraq was going.